Hello everyone, and welcome to the 210th episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring Macrinus from Gladiator 2. Building off the legacy of the first film, I was pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed this movie. Is it essentially the first film with a new coat of paint? Sure, but with a legendary expert in Ridley Scott at the helm, beautiful set pieces, and excellent performances by a well-stacked cast, and you have yourself a great watch that's especially good if you see it in theaters. Despite how great most of the performances were in this film, Denzel Washington as Macrinus without a doubt stole the show, as he typically does. And with myself being impressed by the character, and quite a few requests to cover him from all of you, I figured discussing his character would make for a fun episode. All that being said, though this film is loosely based on historical figures and events, loosely is the key word here, as most of the characters in this film aren't even close to being accurately depicted, so we're only going to be sticking to what we receive in the film in this video when discussing Macrinus' character. But there are a few videos here on YouTube detailing the differences between the events of this film and what actually happened, some of which I'll link for anyone curious down in the description. Now without further ado, let's begin. There are those who sow or support injustices in the world who end up facing no repercussions for doing so, and that is one of the great tragedies of sentient existence. However, it's often the case that injustices are eventually remedied by an equal or greater show of justice by the victims of injustices. But whether justice is wrought in a constructive or a destructive way is up to the individual or individuals carrying it out. For Macrinus, both destructive and constructive elements were required to satisfy his need for justice. At the time the story of Gladiator 2 begins, 16 years have passed since the death of Marcus Aurelius, and we find the empire in a similar state as it was in under Marcus's son Commodus, ruled by the petulant and self-absorbed twin emperors Caracalla and Geta, who seem to have abided by a similar level of hedonism that their predecessor did. The empire and its emperors operate as they often have, with the various apparatuses of the Roman military engaging in a series of never-ending conquests, and the patricians and emperors relaxing in luxury and comfort, as the less fortunate both within and without the walls of Rome only enjoy a sliver of the decadence that they enjoy on a day-to-day basis. But in the time since the fall of Aurelius, one man has built himself up and attained a position that lies somewhere in between the two: Macrinus. Prior to the fall of one of Rome's greatest emperors, Macrinus served in the army of Marcus Aurelius as a slave soldier, presumably accompanying him on many campaigns along with the ones in Africa he stated he was present for to Lucilla. Marcus Aurelius was by all accounts a highly intelligent and compassionate individual, one whose philosophical outlooks on everything from governance to the human condition brought a level of prosperity to his empire the likes of which few in his position have ever been capable of manifesting. Despite this, one man responsible for so much could never have righted all the wrongs of the Roman Empire in a single lifetime, even if he wanted to. However, slavery was not an institution that Aurelius believed should be abolished. Rather, in his many writings, he outlined policies that he believed would ensure those bound to slavery could live as comfortable and meaningful lives as any other citizen of the empire. Despite his more benevolent attitude towards slaves and slavery, the fact remains that slavery is still slavery, and when that designation comes with a lovely firebrand on one's skin, it's easy to see how even with better treatment, being a slave isn't exactly what most people want to be. So once Marcus Aurelius died and Macrinus earned his freedom, the magnanimity of his character did little to convince Macrinus that he should have been grateful to serve under such a benevolent master. Now, we don't know anything about Macrinus' early life, but it's safe to assume that Macrinus was forcibly taken from his home, friends, and family at some point, which is something no one should ever have to experience. Unlike other slaves, though, serving under Marcus Aurelius gave Macrinus the unique opportunity to watch one of the greatest military commanders and political operators of his era in action, and traveling to the various provinces of the empire with his master's entourage also afforded him the opportunity to gain knowledge of various peoples and cultures that helped him understand more of the ways of the world and the people who live in it, something that's reflected in his claim that he knows all the various languages of the empire. And it's these aspects of Macrinus' life that granted him an education far beyond that of your typical slave, which certainly shows in his actions, as we'll soon discuss. Out of all that Macrinus learned from his former master, though, there was one lesson in particular that would serve as his guiding light in the trials to come. The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. A man can choose to fight and stay alive. It's the same in life as in the arena. A quote from Macrinus himself. And in choosing to stay alive, he made it his goal to make himself into the opposite of the man who had once placed him in chains. So rather than lifting himself up to a position of power through the military or politics, Macrinus chose to use his knowledge of slavery and warfare to provide himself with an immense amount of wealth that he could then use to buy his way to a position of power, along the way building up a reputation with Rome's elite that would edge him ever closer to the imperial court with each passing day. The position Macrinus eventually occupied, a purveyor of gladiators, also allowed him to cultivate a small, yet highly loyal army of his own that would carry out his designs when necessary. But what exactly is Macrinus trying to achieve here? Nothing short of absolute power and a complete restructuring of the Roman Empire. And how he almost achieved his goals is both a testament to his cunning as well as the faults in his character. When we first meet Macrinus after Lucius has been captured by the Roman army, we find ourselves presented with a man who looks and acts the part of a wealthy patrician who lords over his chattel. He's dressed immaculately in fine robes and jewelry that instantly gives you the image of a man of wealth and prestige who holds his nose up at the common man. But as we get to know Macrinus, we learn that while he is quite comfortable in his position, he's still in many ways a man of the people, albeit a deeply flawed one. When Macrinus and Lucius are speaking one-on-one for the first time, we're given a bit of insight into his wider philosophy that portends some of the events to come in this story. He explains how when people like him are choosing their gladiators, that some choose entertainers, some choose brute force, but he chooses rage. The crowd loves blood, and they love someone who loves blood as much as they do. While providing people with a good show and thus boosting up his reputation in the gladiator world by offering one is undoubtedly part of why he chooses to field gladiators who hold immense rage in their heart. And rage gladiators also provide Macrinus with something much more valuable: people with a grievance, or a grudge, that he can then bend to his will by providing them with an avenue to exacting their revenge on whoever put them in the position that they're in. Only in Rome is it possible for a slave to lift himself up to a position where he's able to give his masters their comeuppance, and Macrinus provides them with the means to do so. In that same conversation with Lucius, we can see Macrinus' skill in manipulation in action. He asks Lucius, who clearly has a grudge, who he's looking to take down, and when Lucius replies all of Rome, he asks him to settle for something smaller, in this case, General Acacius, and so Macrinus promises that so long as he serves him faithfully, he'll surely get his revenge. And it's this type of honeypotting, along with Macrinus' keen understanding of human desires, that has given him a contingent of loyal soldiers who are willing to work towards fulfilling Macrinus' goals. But it's not just his ability to tantalize those in his service into becoming his faithful tools that Macrinus relies on to enact his designs. Macrinus is also shrewd and cunning when it comes to dealing with Rome's elite, and he employs the same understanding of what makes people tick to make them do what he wants, or put them in situations where they have no choice but to trust him or go along with what he has planned for them. He's charming, witty, and amiable when he wants or needs to be, like when speaking with Emperors Caracalla and Geta in a subservient manner, and he knows when to be the good-natured friend to someone, and when it's time to let the mask fall and force them into doing his bidding. The best example of this is given to us in his dealings with Thrax, a senator who delights in the decadence of his station. Thrax loves to gamble, and knowing when he has the upper hand, Macrinus enters into a wager with Thrax twice, once when he introduces Lucius to him at a party, and again when his gladiators are going up against Macrinus's in the Colosseum, both of which Thrax ends up losing. Thrax, who seems to be the kind of man whose gambling debts ensure he's always strapped for cash, fails to come up with the money to pay for his debts to Macrinus. Macrinus takes his home and demands that he pledge his loyalty to him as well as the various resources at his disposal, which includes his network of spies that keep him informed on all the goings-on in Rome. However, Macrinus is careful here to be forceful with Thrax, yet not too overbearing, as he knows that even when someone is under your thumb, it's better for them to be happy and to still view you as a friend than it is for them to be cowed so thoroughly into submission that they begin to hate you more than they already do. So instead of screaming at him when he arrives at Thrax's home, he speaks to him softly and in a friendly manner, kissing his hands and his cheeks as he tells him what he's to do and what his role will be. And this moment is as sinister as it is expertly calculating. With the knowledge he gained from Thrax of Lucilla and Acacius' plot to overthrow the emperors, and their plans to free Lucius from bondage, Macrinus finally reaches the point where he can begin rolling out his plans in earnest, and after informing Caracalla and Geta of the plot, he convinces them that making a public show of their treason in the Colosseum is the best course of action, to let the gods decide their fate, and let all of Rome know that a hero of their nation, Acacius, is a traitor who deserves to be punished accordingly. Unfortunately for the woefully foolish twin emperors, they could not see that publicly executing a Roman hero would backfire on them. And when chaos ensues and the populace begin to riot, they only have one man to turn to for guidance, the ever-present Macrinus. Once again displaying his aptitude for manipulation, Macrinus convinces the diseased mind of Caracalla that his brother is attempting to eliminate him, which sends Caracalla into a fury that ends with Macrinus guiding his hand to slash his brother's throat. The next day, when Caracalla presents himself as sole emperor to the Senate and maddeningly promotes his pet monkey Dondus to first consul, the senators are rightfully in shock, even more so when Macrinus presents them with the severed head of Geta. This is another grand show of cunning on Macrinus' part, as not only does he present the senators with a crazed emperor who surely needs to be put down, but further proof of how far he's fallen with the implication that he murdered his brother, placing fear in their hearts that can only be remedied by the one man who still had the ear of the emperor. Macrinus, savior of Rome, from the chaos that he unleashed. The performance he puts on here is another masterful show of Macrinus' skill in political and personal manipulation, which is further emphasized for us in the moments before Lucilla is to be publicly executed in the Colosseum, when he remarks to a senator that after the crowd goes mad with rage after seeing their beloved former queen executed, he'll present himself as savior of the empire, with the head of Caracalla in his hand. Now, despite how flawless Macrinus' plan to get him to this position was, unfortunately for him, this would be the beginning of the end for his short reign over the Roman Empire. Though Macrinus showed himself time and time again to be a man capable of understanding the hearts and minds of people, there was one thing in particular that ensured his downfall: his overestimation of his position and the capabilities of those in his service. After securing his position, Macrinus was so sure that he'd planned for every eventuality and that no one around him could oppose him any longer, that he failed to consider the lengths Lucius would go to free himself. And he failed to account for the fact that Lucius had steadily become a hero to not just the Roman people, but his fellow gladiators, men who, much like Macrinus, detested serving under a master they never wanted to serve. He assumed that men locked in cages that he held the key to never had a chance of opposing him. So when he met with Lucius before Lucilla's execution, and declared his intent to continue using him as an extension of his will, something that Lucius refused to be, he figured he was a non-factor who couldn't possibly harm him. So when Lucius and his army of gladiators stormed the Colosseum, Macrinus had no answer. And though he was able to rally the Praetorian Guard to his cause, and send them to meet the army Lucius had rallied to his cause, in the end, Macrinus and his ambitions fell to Lucius's sword, ending the efforts of a man scorned to satisfy his need for revenge. And when examining his defeat, what he intended to do, and how he intended to do it, were given some great insight into why Macrinus wasn't just fated to fail in the end despite his talents, but why he needed to fail. Macrinus' desire to gain the emperor's throne for himself was built entirely off his desire for revenge, and not just against those who put him in bondage, but the entire system. Now that isn't exactly a bad thing, as desiring to disrupt and dismantle a system of slavery is an admirable goal to have. If you take a look at some of the things Macrinus says though, you realize that he isn't necessarily trying to dismantle slavery, but turn it on its head. The Colosseum is the greatest temple the Romans ever built because it's what they believe in: power. Marcus Aurelius spoke of dreams. I speak of truth. And the only truth in my Rome is the law of the strongest. Power and strength. That is the truth that Macrinus speaks of here. Of the raw power that one can wield and use to brute force their way through any obstacle, no matter what it is. What are ideals in the face of power? What is a dream of Rome to an axe that can tear that dream asunder? Dreams are fantasy. Strength is real. And with that strength, I believe that it strongly implied that what Macrinus planned to do was force any remaining members of the Roman elite and military who had a hand in his enslavement down into slavery themselves, with precious few being lifted out of that horrid institution. For as much as Macrinus detested being a slave, he never claimed to be the champion of the enslaved, only himself. And so it's reasonable to assume that those who didn't immediately suffer his wrath would be kept ever after as veritable slaves to his will. An empire that would exist solely to satisfy the wants and needs of a man who had clawed his way to the top through strength of will alone. The law of the strong inherently ensures that the weak will suffer, that those who are less fortunate or incapable of accessing the same opportunities as those around them will suffer simply because they're unable to reach the levels of power afforded to more privileged or gifted individuals. And while such a concept is harrowing, it's because Macrinus built his entire world around revenge for himself and the law of the strong that he was doomed to fail. Macrinus granted freedom and justice for himself only, using his formidable skills in manipulation and intrigue to claw his way to the top. And though he himself desired freedom, Macrinus had become so jaded that he only sought to grant that freedom to himself. And as much as he was adept at reading people and understanding how to bend them to his will, he was seemingly incapable of looking beyond the fact that the average man does not cling to the ideals of power and strength, but to freedom and peace. So when he was faced with a man who had both dreams of freedom and peace for himself and his people, as well as the strength to carry out those designs, Macrinus failed. For even if darkness casts a shadow over people for generations, eventually the light shines through and sends darkness scurrying back to the depths from which it came. Macrinus may have been a man with a legitimate grievance who deserved justice for what happened to him, but in his pursuit of justice, he focused solely on himself, what he wanted to achieve, and not what was best for those who suffered in the ways that he had suffered. And as intelligent, magnanimous, and ruthless as he was, in the end, Macrinus' designs were centered on the self. And while selfishness is not inherently evil, evil is always selfish. And for condemning an entire nation to suffer the will of a man who focused only on the revenge he so desired, that man must forever remain consigned to the dismal watery tomb created by his own evil. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on Macrinus? Did I miss anything? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, my patrons, my members, and anyone who's decided to honor me with a super thank. And a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and subreddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.